to be on the same screen with these guys. And we'll get to some intros here in a second. We got Scott Lindgren, Rush Sturges, and Willie Kern collectively representing probably the entire history of whitewater kayaking. The absolute legends. And most recently, you've probably they've certainly risen to fame, at least outside of the lunchbox of kayaking and more mainstream through this film, The River Runner. And that's kind of what we have the opportunity to talk about, which I'm super stoked about. If you guys haven't seen it, hopefully most of the people here have. It's on Netflix right now, and it's sweet because if you go to like the what's popular on Netflix right now, that's what shows up, which I think is so cool. And another cool part about this film that maybe not everyone knew is that Rush and Scott really kind of out of the goodness of their own hearts and their belief in the mission of First Descents, made this a partnership with First Descents to help raise mission and awareness for the mission. Is actually to date, I think, brought in over $60,000 for First Descents, which is just tremendous, incredible. And Scott, your impact is continuing to ripple outside of you, which is really cool to see. And then, of course, Willie Kern, you were such a huge part of this film and your story and your history in the sport of kayaking. I think it was beautiful to see that. You've been involved with First Descents for a long time yourself. And so it just seemed like the whole thing came together really beautifully. I'm going to just go quickly. If you guys want to just give a quick intro about yourselves and we'll start with you, Willie, and just sort of your history with kayaking and First Descents in this film.
Yeah, Willie, Sweet D Kern here. I have been around First Descents for a long time. Where is it? It's right there. I got to show it somewhere. But yeah, I've been around for 10 years and worked with the programs team and just watched this organization explode. And this has been an interesting chapter in a life again that has just been steeped in rivers. Grew up on and around rivers, and then, you know, the film showcases one, you know, portion of that, or at least chronicles one timeline within that. But yeah, FD's been a really important part of that, and coming full circle. But it's great because, again, everybody on this call right here, everybody is sitting on this panel here, has contributed a great deal to what, you know, to FD's mission and where it's headed and where we're going.
Yeah, buddy. Hey, Rush, why don't we send you next, bud?
Cool. All right. Yeah, my name is Rush. I'm based here in White Salmon, Washington. I run River Roots Productions. And this is kind of like my first sort of collaboration project with First Descents. A longtime buddy of Brad Ludden's, and have always just really admired what you've done with the organization, Brad, and, you know, witnessing you starting it at, you know, such a young age, and I've just always really had the utmost respect and admiration for, you know, for the mission. And yeah, it was a huge honor to collaborate on this project and to work together on it.
Sweet. And I think it's worth noting that Rush is actually a musician as well, quite accomplished. Was that your song there at the end?
Yeah, I did do a song at
yeah, it sounded great. And just a quick side note here, when Rush was coming up, he was part of this group called the Young Guns, and I was honored to be featured in one of his rap songs, but it wasn't the most flattering lyric. That's how I came to meet Rush. I was in one of his rap songs.
I think it was a diss track, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't. Whatever you call it, wasn't very nice. But we became friends after that. So
can we cut to that track right now?
Yeah. Well,
we'll have Rush freestyle that one later.
We always used to tease Brad for being too old for being in the Young Guns, which was pretty funny because he's like 4 years older than me or something. You know?
Still feeling too old.
Yeah.
Oh man. And Scott, what about you, bud?
Scott Lindgren, from Northern California. I've known Brad pretty much, I feel like your whole life, or from a very early age, huh? Your sister and I were safety kayakers on the South Fork of the Payette. And then the thing that comes to mind is our trip that we did to Uganda, like around 1999 or 2000. And I remember actually sitting at the Blue Moon and you and I having a beer and talking about you starting First Descents with your mom. Yeah, and that was super cool, and just to watch this whole thing grow into what it is just unbelievable, and super grateful to have you guys be a part of this, and just the partnership in general has just been amazing all the way around, and the support, and more importantly, I think the realization for me in my story, and the things that came to fruition for me and what I sort of realized in the process coincided with a lot of what First Descents is about, and what First Descents is doing. And it just made sense. So yeah, super honored to be here, and grateful for you and for First Descents and everything that you guys do.
Thanks, man. I also think it's worth noting that you mentioned this earlier. You are alive.
Oh my God.
I don't think you have 2 kids, and maybe your net worth is slightly exaggerated. Do you want to talk about that real quick? Because this has been fascinating to me.
We actually don't know what happened. The first report actually was an obituary.com sort of thing that came out, and I kind of tracked it down. It was out of Pakistan. It really wasn't much when it started, and then it just really snowballed from there. And then all of a sudden, if you Googled my name or you watched the movie, the first like 10 or so things that were coming up were basically my death. And then you would go over to YouTube, and there was like a half a dozen or a dozen or so videos that were confirming it. And so it just set off this chain of events that just really, at first I didn't think much of it, but it just cascaded into this like scenario where my family was calling me crying, relatives, friends, emails, messages, DMs, and we were trying to combat it. We were reporting it to Google, we were reporting to YouTube, we asked people to help us report, to really no avail. And I mean, I think still some of it is up, but it seems to have calmed down, that now that it's kind of run the full course. We were accused of actually it being a publicity stunt to drive viewers to, you know, whatever. And I'm alive, I'm well. I have a beautiful girlfriend. She has 2 kids. Definitely not worth what they say I'm worth. So if that, if I mean, it's crazy. Even one of the executive producers of the film, just like a handful of days ago, sent this like huge email to Rush, just saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. After everything that you've been through, I can't believe this has happened." And we're just like, holy moly, like it is just like blowing up into this thing. So yep, I'm happy to report that I am alive, I am well, I'm happy, and super grateful to be here.
Dude, what a surreal and weird thing to have happened. I'm glad. Yeah, this is live, everybody, so it's true. We can
Yeah. Apparently it happened to Alex Honnold too. Okay. Apparently there was like, apparently it happened to him as well. That was the word on the street. I got a few messages where there was like this whole string that went on for the better part of a week or two where, you know, they had reported his death as well. So I don't know what that is.
Wow, we're just glad it's not true, buddy. It's good to see you.
Me too, bud. I'm so happy to be here.
Let's talk a bit about this film, Rush. I know, like, Rush, you're a super accomplished filmmaker, as is Scott. You guys collectively probably made most of the larger or more widely distributed films in kayaking in the history of the sport. What led you to this one? How was the process? Like, I know peripherally it's been you've dedicated a lot of yourself to this, so I'd love to hear from you, like how you came up with this idea, and you know, between that and getting it on Netflix. Tell me about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's important to note, I guess, that, you know, I grew up watching Scott's movies, so that was really the inspiration for me, I think, to kind of become a paddling adventure filmmaker. So I was always have looked up to his films, and I think he kind of laid the groundwork for like the, you know, the career path that I took, which was really combining paddling with filmmaking. And I had originally wanted to do a film that was kind of more historical within the sport, like specifically focused around paddling in California, just because there's so much kind of rich history there, and I grew up there. And so, you know, Scott and I tried to kind of get a project actually funded a long time ago that was just based on California history, and that kind of fell through. So there was kind of like, you know, I was sort of like working on this, you know, almost like a decade ago. And then I ended up doing a film called Chasing Niagara, which ended up sort of consuming my life for the better part of 4 years. And then kind of right after finishing that, Scott and I did a trip down Middle Kings, and that was actually kind of one of the first sort of expedition trips we'd kind of been on together, or multi-days. And he just started kind of telling me more of his story. And it was at that point that I kind of realized that, that the narrative really should kind of shift more towards Scott's story. But it was supposed to be kind of a short film. Like I didn't really want to dig into another feature project just because they do take so much time. But yeah, it's kind of just this project's been interesting because it's really just sort of been like one step, the first of which was to go to Pakistan for Scott to run the fourth and final river. And out of that kind of grew this whole sort of monster, which ended up being, this kind of 4-year process of ultimately making the decision to do a biography film based on his life. And then, making a film there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not it's going to work, and is it going to actually get sold on the back end. And yeah, fortunately we were able to secure a deal with Netflix and get it out there to the world. So that's kind of the condensed version.
What I mean, I saw some of the versions before the final version, and it just seemed like, from my perspective, there was so much amazing content there, both the stuff you guys filmed more recently, but then the historical archival footage. Was there anything or a couple of things that didn't make it the final film that you really wish had, or that you really had a hard time parting with?
Oh, dude. I mean, there's so much stuff that was really, really tough to part with. I mean, we built out these sections that were really great. Like we had a whole section just based around the second descent of Middle Kings, and lots of footage of Chuck in there, and there was a lot of stuff, especially from the kind of California more historical kayaking era, that we cut back, I mean, honestly, like 20 minutes plus. And so that was really tough to part with, just because the kayaker in me is always wanting to hold on to that stuff. But it was thanks to bringing in an editor, Aiden Haley, who was a non-kayaker, and also Thayer Walker, the writer, who were really coming at it from a more like the standpoint being more strategic in terms of like, how do we make this appeal to a large audience? And so I had to be reined in a little bit on what I was holding on to, but in the end, I think it's a more appealing film for a general audience. But as a kayaker, there's still lots of stuff I would have held on to if I could have, for sure.
Maybe you can do some short films or something, because some of that
totally.
Man, it was, I mean, I'm sure Willie and Scott, you guys would probably agree, but for me, it was like watching the history of our sport. I mean, it was like this, if nothing else, we have this documented history of whitewater kayaking encapsulated in one truly profound and moving video of Scott and his life and his journey. So I applaud you for it. And if you want to make a bunch of other films with all the footage that didn't make it, I'll watch all of them.
Yeah, that'd be down.
Willie, I know you and I, we go way back too. You played a huge role in this film because you played a huge role in Scott's life and the kayak community and as a whole. One of the things that you guys talk about in this film, I think, impacted the community, you guys specifically, and it was a big part of the story, was the loss of your brother. I don't want to bring it down or get too personal, but I want to hear about how that affected you, and how and if you have turned to, or what role adventure and outdoor recreation has played in your healing process with losing Chuck.
It's a really big question right there. And it's hard not to react and respond a little bit every time that I think about what the film has done, which it has sort of brought Chuck back to life a little bit. And I've been talking with folks about this notion of, getting to meet him for the first time. He's a legend. And for people that never got to know him, to actually hear his voice and to hear him, say things. And that's where I would say also, if there's, the archive of that, I've already planned with Scott to go and just, watch that in the closet some weekend and just kind of take it all on. But, I think that what's been really powerful for me is this notion that, loss, tragedy, trauma, all these things, they don't have to define us, but boy, they really have an opportunity to help us see things through a different light, right? And, I think that Rush did, and Scott and everybody did a great job of, taking those key inflection points as I've just been a friend with Scott along this journey. And, I'm kind of an accessory to, if you will. but I think that, you know, to see this play out on so many levels, and, you know, Chuck's piece is so important for me and for our relationship, but then I just think of what it means to us and what it meant to us then. And then I think about really powerful experiences that everybody's facing. And I've sat around campfires at FD, and I've, you know, heard so many different versions of that cathartic experience that kind of forces you to, you know, face a different reality, if you will. And I think that it's been so interesting and cool. And, you know, the journey again of just unearthing all this stuff, the conversations that have gone on behind the scenes. You know, Darby McAdams, who was working behind the scenes, she would call me and be like, I just saw the funniest video of you saying something that you never want seen ever. You know, it's just funny to imagine that all that got, you know, unearthed. And it's really powerful and I feel really fortunate to be able to go back and get to do that. And thanks Rush and Scott and everybody who, you know, ever pointed a camera at anything, because it's an important archive of where we've been, which is just part of a bigger, you know, anthology of running rivers and being in kayaks that transcends us, you know, in the past and will transcend us in the future. So
yeah, man, it was really nice to see that film again, just to see all that film in one place, right? Like it was all out there somewhere, but to have it all come together in that story and to relive some of those moments. And certainly Chuck was the best of all of us. I mean, that guy was a legend from day one. So it was really nice to see him again. Scott, what you've had quite a journey, bro? I don't even know where to start with you. I wanted before, I think there are two really profound parts of your story that Rush captured beautifully, or so I think, that there was this sort of human side of it, and then there's the whitewater side of it. And each one in its own right is a story, a monumental story worth telling. To have them come together in this film in one film was pretty it's moving. I've watched it a few times now and I'm still moved by it. I want to start though with the kayaking story. Just as an athlete too, I mean, you're not that old, but you know, you're older, and you had kind of hung it up, right? Like you more or less, and the film talks about this, but you were kind of done with kayaking, and I don't think a lot of people fully appreciate what it took for you to get from the couch, so to speak, to the Indus and everything in between. You want to just, I want to hear from you more about that journey, what it took, how it affected you, how you dealt with it, how you overcame it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like with anything, when you spend your entire life practicing one thing, and then you kind of are forced to leave on different terms, or terms that you hadn't planned on. I think that was like a really hard transition for me. You know, my identity was wrapped up in, you know, river travel and river expeditions, and it's something that I saw myself. I used to say, you could take everything away from me, but you can't take the river away from me. And boy, did that prove to be wrong. And then, you know, when it was kind of taken away, I you know, my identity was so wrapped up in it, and I was just lost. And so it was just this really difficult period of time. And intuitively too, I knew something health wise was going on. And I think something that the film, it talks about a little bit, but it doesn't dive into it a lot, in that, like, there was this point from when I knew something was wrong, and I started going to the doctor, and then, you know, nothing was really coming back. And the first thing that I was actually diagnosed with was hypothyroidism. And that was sort of my first symptom. And intuitively, I had asked my, you know, doctor, you know, after doing a little bit of research on my pituitary and how that works with your thyroid and how the function of that works, that if it was worth taking a picture. And, you know, obviously that wasn't within the protocol. And so it kind of, I went on thyroid medication, and I did get better, but I definitely still had lost the fire. And it wasn't until, you know, 5 years later that I had the headache that, you know, caused them to take the picture. And so there was just like this period of uncertainty as to like who I was, how I was feeling, and the transition of not leaving on my own terms. And then all of a sudden, you know, I am diagnosed and everything made sense. And my first reaction was like, I wasn't bummed. I was like grateful, because I felt like I was kind of not losing my mind. I just didn't feel right. And it just solidified so much. And then also too, just being in my nature to want to fight, um, you know, it gave me something to fight. And so it I came out of brain surgery, and I started to like feel things. You know, one of the things with my tumor is it had grown into my sinus cavity, and it had messed with my equilibrium. And it talks about it a little bit in the film, where I flip upside down and I kind of lose spatial awareness and I don't know where I'm at. And it is the truth. It was something like, you know, when I went underwater, something like, maybe it was just like the way that it floated or something, but like it pushed on me a little bit differently, and it just caused this sort of, not blackout, but just like not knowing where I was at. And that's ultimately what drove me out of the kayak in the first place. I was like, look, there's just no way that I feel comfortable kayaking harbor rivers when I'm struggling with, you know, having spatial awareness upside down. And that started to go away. And I mean, it was like weekly, I was seeing these things like come back. My ears were clear, my sinuses were clear, my equilibrium was back. I was just, my thoughts were clear, my cloudy head was clear. Um, and it just dawned on me. I was just like, holy, like maybe I can get back in the kayak. And when I got back in the kayak, it wasn't like, I'm going to go run the Indus. It wasn't like that at all. My relationship with the river when I got back in the kayak was totally different than my relationship prior. You know, my relationship prior was with corporate sponsors and expeditions and making films. And this time I had gotten back in the kayak just for me. And there was really nothing to prove. There was no one to impress. There was no money involved. I was buying and paying for all my own equipment, and really I just wanted the connection back, you know, with the river. And so I kind of went on that journey and started to get back in it. And I just was so grateful to be in touch with it again, and to have that. And the Indus didn't really come into play for quite some time. I mean, I had spent a good half a year in the kayak, you know, and even up until Rush and I went and did our Middle Kings trip, I had started, that was in August of 2016. And I had started kayaking early that year in 2016. You know, just after my surgery, I had kind of gotten right back in it. And so I really just was slowly, you know, getting back. And the Middle Kings trip with Rush was huge, because I really wanted to go back to some of these places. And the catalyst to all of that was actually a phone call from Jerry Moffett. And Jerry had reached out to me, and he's like, hey, look, I'm turning 53. I want to go do the Grand Canyon of the Stikine, and I would love if you and Willie could come do it with me. And I was like, Jerry, I'm like so far from being in a place to comfortably go kayak the Stikine. Like, I don't, like, I can't say yes, but I'm not going to say no. And, you know, that kind of gave me this sort of goal. And so once I had that kind of in the back of my mind, I was like, you know, maybe I could get to a space to where I felt comfortable going and doing that. And that's literally what it was I had told myself, like, look, I've got to somehow make this second nature, to make it feel comfortable. I didn't want it to be a stunt. I didn't want it to be me going out and barely hanging on. I wanted to feel really good about going up and doing that. And so that was really the catalyst that got me going to where it was like, okay, let's just get out of bed and go kayaking. We ended up going and doing the Stikine that fall, and I ended up doing 2 laps, and man, that just the thought of being on the Middle Kings again, or the thought of being on the Stikine again, was so surreal. I was just so blessed, and it was something that I had. It wasn't even in my forethought. It wasn't even I hadn't even, I wasn't even close to thinking that that was ever going to be an option for me again. I just really had signed off on all of those places that I spent the better part of my life trying to go to. And I came off of the Stikine, and the Indus still wasn't really in play. And I paddled. We had a really good winter that year in California in 2017, and I paddled pretty, full time. And then it was that spring when I ran into Annual, and this actually doesn't get explained in the film either. When Annual actually, when I met Annual, I had known Annual for a while, and we had had conversation and stuff like that. And we had paddled that summer before Rush and I had done the Middle Kings. Annual and I went up and did Upper Cherry Creek, and which is another big expedition here in California. And I had gone back out to the North Fork of the Payette, and on that car ride is when we, had that conversation about, the 4 rivers and going up and doing the Indus. And that's when Annual kind of dropped the bomb and said, hey, I'm going to do the Indus here this in the fall. And so literally it was going to be like, go to the Stikine and then go to the Indus. And I was just like, no way. There's like no way that I'm even close to, let alone going to the Stikine and then going straight to the Indus. And as it turned out, as an American tourist in Pakistan, they weren't allowing Americans into the Gilgit region that year. So a whole year, basically, Annual ended up going that year. And then it was the following year that him and Mike Dawson, they were on that first trip together. And they called me from Gilgit right when they got off, right as I got back from the Stikine. And they said, hey, I think we worked out permission for you to come to the Indus next year. And so then that was when the reality kind of set in, that it was like, okay, like maybe there's a shot here. And even when that became like sort of a reality or potential reality, I gave myself like a 5% shot. Like to get to that space, especially at that time, I think I was like 45. I'm about to turn 50 here in January. To get to that space and not get hurt or not get killed. And, and I didn't want to be loose. I wanted to like really make it second nature and feel super confident. And so I just set myself on this path to, okay, this is what I need to do to get there. And if I can get there, great. If I can't, great. And at this time too, there's no film. This is just the boys and I talking. And I had made the decision to go to Africa right before, which is something that I was kind of sad there was 2 things about the film that broke my heart the most that didn't make it into the film, and that are, I believe, really close to me, was the Zambezi and the Stikine. I felt like those 2 rivers are, the Stikine has always been this river that has been the example of what a big expedition river trip should look like and feel like. And it was kind of like everything was like, that was the river that we took the recipe from and applied it to all these other rivers. And, we looked at the gradient, we looked at the volume, and we would apply that to the Sangpo. We would apply that to all these other things to see if they were runnable or not. Like the Stikine is 60 feet a mile. Site Z, the biggest rapid in the Stikine, that mile there is about 120 foot mile. We always felt that Site Z was runnable. So we always felt like, with volume and gradient, that 100 foot, 120 foot mile could possibly be runnable. And so I just really, those 2 rivers were the rivers that I kind of missed the most. And right before I went over to the Indus, I went to the Zambezi for a month. and I was there for 26 days, and I did 24 out of 26 days on the Zambezi. And when I got on the plane to fly to the Indus, after being on the Zambezi for that amount of time, I was like, holy cow, I can't believe I made it here in one piece. And then, yeah, it's just like and then it was actually, as I was leaving for the Zambezi, Rush had reached out to me, and he was like, hey, I'm thinking about coming over and shooting the Indus. And I was like, sweet, what are you thinking? And he's like, well, I think we should do like a little 10-minute YouTube video. And I was like, awesome. Let's, if you think you can do it. And he's like, well, I think I'm going to put it all on a credit card. And I was like, kid, you don't want to put it all on a credit card, And he's like, no, man, I think I can sell it. And I was like, okay, put it on the credit card. We'll see what happens. And so that's what happened. He put it on the credit card, and it went from a boys trip to Rush coming over with a full crew, and we shot the Indus, and the whole thing was just unbelievable. And it was on the Indus that I had disclosed a little bit as to like what was going on, and with Rush, and I hadn't really given sort of the deep inner workings of what was going on. And on the Indus, Annual knew. I had definitely had conversations with Annual and a few of the other kids, and then I finally was just like, I've got nothing to lose at this point. I'm just going to start, telling everyone what happened, what was going on. And we came home from the Indus, and we did this little cut of the Indus, and we were still kind of in this sort of, as Rush was explaining, we were in this phase. Are we making a film for the community, or are we trying to make a film for a broader audience? And then I think, once we kind of realized that, and once we realized that maybe this thing had more legs than what was originally thought, it was sort of like, okay, then it fell on me to, tell the story. And then also too, Brad, like a huge thing to this whole sort of thing was when you and I were in South America, when I ran into you in Chile, and you were down there, and I had kind of told you, everything that was going on. And one of the things that you had mentioned to me when we were down in South America was that, we've got this thing with First Descents, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And one of the things that's going on is that our applications that we're getting from people are like, 75, 80% women and 20% men. And I remember having this conversation where it's like, I know why. And much like a lot of people in my situation, when you've been diagnosed or you have cancer, my first response was, I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want anyone. I didn't, outside of my family, I made my family swear that they not say anything. I didn't want to walk into a room and have people look at me in the corner and go, that's the guy with the brain tumor. And that was like something that I looked at as a weakness, and I isolated myself. And I think, especially with men, something that happens is that when you're diagnosed, that's what comes up, and that's the intuitive thing to do. And especially for me, I didn't know how to ask for help, and I didn't, know how to process that. I just thought that, I would just bury it and it would go away. And as you know, and as with First Descents and everything that First Descents does in creating community, right? Because when you're diagnosed, you're diagnosed, you're treated, and then, outside of PT, which there is no PT for cancer patients, you're kicked to the curb, and and you're kind of left up to yourself or to your family to find community or to find somebody that can relate to your situation. And for me, I had no one, and I wasn't talking to anyone about it. And then, when I finally talk to you and everything that was going on with First Descents, and then coming out to the FD ball and getting up and speaking at the First Descents ball. That was really the first time I had gotten up and told, other than in an interview, had gotten up and told the story. And just the support from the FD trip that I did on the main salmon really gave me the strength to face this thing and stare it down and throw caution to the wind and go against instinct. I mean, instinctually, I wanted to crawl under my bed, and I didn't want to face it. And that's a really tricky place to be. And also too, it's not a healing place to be. You're not healing when you're in that frame of mind. And that's something that I think with the film, did a really good job of portraying that, like, literally, like, getting out of your environment, getting out in nature, getting out on the river, getting out hiking, surfing, all of these things, like, it's so important. Your entire inner being changes when you're out in nature. And it just connected and sang to my heart so much. And it made such a huge difference. And it just gave me so much strength to face this thing and to disclose and be shameless and be fearless. And hindsight, it's like so courageous, right? Like, everyone that's battling, like, you watch all these crazy athletes, you watch humans do all these amazing feats, and it's nothing compared to what somebody's going through when they're going 5 rounds of chemo, or they're doing 6 rounds of radiation, or 6 weeks of radiation, or they're doing 10-hour brain surgeries. Like, that's savagery. That's an inner fire that is not teachable. And so for me, I just once that frame of mind changed, that really was just that was it. I was just like, okay, like, there is no more shame in this anymore. There's only, like, if I can share and somebody else can, like, remotely pick up on anything or relate to anything that I'm experiencing, then prayer hands for all the way across the board. And yeah, I just so grateful, man.
Well, thanks, Sky. It's been speaking personally, I've always admired you. To see you in Rush, you guys talked about this in the film, but and Willie, you've known Scott longer than I have probably, but you're a different person, man. and in my opinion, in all the right ways, and when you talk about how, and I felt this sometimes when we filmed together, like, there was no space for weakness or emotion. Understandably, I understood why you felt that way, but then to see on the Indus when these younger guys took you under their wings, right, and approached it from a different mental place, and with compassion and empathy and kindness, and to receive that, that transformation, that growth has just been so inspiring for me to watch. And so I appreciate you. I can only imagine the type of courage it takes to tell your story, both on a Netflix documentary and forums like this, and rooms at the FD ball. And I just want to say it's been inspiring to witness and hear about. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I appreciate it. Well, you know more than anybody. It's like, when you're doing these sort of expeditions at that elite level, the idea of emotional instability is not an option, right? And when you have emotional instability, when somebody shows up with emotional instability on a huge expedition, it's a threat to the expedition. It's viewed as a weakness, and it's viewed as a safety risk, or at least it was in our generation. And I spent the better part of my kayaking career ostracizing that behavior, only because so many people close to us had passed, on the river. And so it had created this insulated bubble where you just surrounded yourself with these people that were basically numb in the emotional IQ level. I mean, and when we were on the river, it worked. really, really well. It worked really well. And we were extremely successful, and we got a lot of accolades, and that supported the behavior. And then the idea that um, not being able to compartmentalize the behavior and leave that behavior on the river, and then bringing that behavior to all the other facets of your life, and as you know, and at least for me, it doesn't work, right? It didn't work, and I didn't have the emotional IQ. I didn't have the awareness to separate that and to leave that there, and to show up differently. And that was, once I was able to realize that and process that and then separate that, it changed everything for me in so many different ways. I mean, and on the Indus, it was amazing. I mean, we had just a cohesiveness and an openness, and I mean, we had moments for sure. Annual Swim was a super radical moment right at the beginning of the film, or right at the beginning at the top of the Indus. I mean, it was almost surreal to see that kid swim. I mean, that was a savage swim, and it was very, very humbling, I think, for all of us, when that happened. And for me in particular, I relied on that kid so much, and quite a few other kids as well, to get behind them and to follow them and to get back in shape to be able to go and do that. And it was just a very, very humbling moment. But there was a moment there where Annual was like, he had an emotional moment, and it wasn't at the actual spot where he swam. It was actually downstream where he got pinned, and he had jumped out of his kayak and his boat had got submerged under a rock, and he was just having a terrible day. And he was super bummed, and it was just like this amazing conversation that we had. And had that been in the past, I just see that conversation going so differently. And yeah, it was just like one of those things where having that awareness and being able to compartmentalize behavior and know when to show up and how to show up with your heart, not your ego and your intellect in those situations. And it's just so unbelievably grateful to see that, yeah, with my own two eyes.
It's awesome, man. It showed through the film. Rush, and dude, I can't, like, everyone's like, that film was great, and it's that White War is crazy. I'm like, yeah, but the craziest thing was who Scott has become, in my opinion. And I'm so humbled by it, bud. Rush, what was your like favorite part of this film? Making of it, like, what is there anything that sticks out as like your favorite thing, your favorite experience, and maybe your least favorite or worst? And I'll let you characterize those or however you want.
Yeah, it's had a lot of definitely ups and downs. I mean, like, probably to start with the worst part. I mean, I think like the worst part of any film is honestly like trying to like raise the money, just to like, I love making art and I love doing film. Not having like the resources, that can be pretty stressful. So at the start, as Scott mentioned, putting it on a credit card and just rolling the dice, that was sketchy and probably not the wisest thing. But this sort of profession does like require like risk sometimes, and I was pretty confident that I felt like for sure somebody would be willing to support it. And so that was tough to like kind of get shut down by a number of corporations and sponsors that I thought would maybe want to get behind it. But honestly, it's kind of like it's a little bit of a the story is kind of raw, and it just didn't appeal to people initially, but it's like, if you build it, they'll come, and that's kind of what happened. Like I put together a sizzle, and sort of, I think once folks started to see the messaging, they started to believe in it more. But my favorite part was probably, I mean, I like all aspects of filmmaking, but I loved working on the music and having a budget to hire a symphony and work with several different composers. And I feel like in a lot of ways, the last 4 years has been like it's been an educational experience for me. Completing a feature is just, you're involved with so many different aspects of it. I guess I liked all of those aspects, but I feel like doing the music is always just really, really fun. I feel like editing sometimes can just really be a grind and kind of suck. And there's a lot of aspects of it that feel like work every day, but for whatever reason, I'm always stoked when I'm working on the music, you know?
You nailed it, man. That was pretty fun to watch the whatever the symphony, you know, that was, dude, I was like, wow, kayaking's come a long way.
Written and scored
yeah, dude,
for the film, which is unbelievable.
I'm trying to keep up. We have some really great comments coming in. We have a couple questions I want to get to. I appreciate everyone who's commenting and or asking questions. You are being heard, or they are being read, I should say. And I just got a little permission to go a little longer, which makes me happy. Because Willie, I wanted to ask you, I know Scott everyone who's listening, if you get a chance after this, you should just Google the Sturges River. And I love how Scott just like brings these rivers up. I never ran the Sturges, and it wasn't because I didn't get to, it's because I chose not to. Willie, like you've been on so many rivers with Scott and you have so many stories. How is this, like, tell me your perspective on all this. Like, talk about being there with Scott in the trenches on the rivers. You've seen him since the early days. And I feel like you guys, you know, your crew, you and your brothers and kind of some of those boys, like you guys were thick as thieves and have been through it all together. And I'd love to just hear from you what resonates with you and some anecdotes and kind of your perspective on all this.
I mean, let me begin by saying, Brad, the Sturges is still there for you.
I am inspired. It is possible. Oh my goodness. Let's we'll see. You know,
I mean, it's interesting.
I'm not saying no.
I'll be going back shortly. Now there's a boat that I feel very comfortable in. So please come along, Brad. It's a whole new era.
Oh man.
No, that being said, I think that, you know, I'm just going to speak to the Sturges for a moment because it's one of those ones that, like, when I really dig into this story, when I dig into the, you know, this collection of inflection points, the things that really laid the foundation for the way that we operated, you know, and it's interesting. I think sometimes I take a little bit personally this notion that, like, you know, maybe like that we weren't supportive or that we were less supportive than they were on the Indus because, you know, it felt a little bit differently. We all have our own experiences in places. And I think that, you know, I was thinking about it as Scott was talking, and there's this notion of like, we were really putting ourselves out there in a way that I don't think other people had. And I don't think there was really a handbook for how that worked. And I've seen, you know, Scott get into these positions where, you know, we were doing something for the love of it, just for the sheer thrill of it. And then it becomes bigger than that. And how do you respond to that? And then, you know, how do you recover from that? How do you return to that passion? How does it, you know, then it gets bigger again. And then you're like, oh, you know, it's kind of like this keeps on sort of growing. It's like a, you know, a plant that you can't keep control of a little bit, or that's sort of when I think back. But the Sturges is, you know, such an interesting place because, you know, first descents, right? Like this, just take the name of the organization, right? This notion of a first descent. It's just this willingness to put yourself in a place that you necessarily may not be comfortable, the place that you are really challenging yourself, peak adventure, you know, whatever that is for you. And I think, again, I always go back to like, how do we learn about ourselves? And, you know, I think back to when I met Scott. Scott, you know, had just gotten his first taste of the Sturges. And so every essential piece of my relationship with Scott was somehow infused with what Scott brought back from his trip on the Sturges, right? And then that linked us to our trip on the Sturges, you know, which we have our own unfortunate distinction of high water in there, you know, and that, you know, forges a whole different, you know, set of circumstances. But I think that what I love about rivers, what I love about first descents, and again, you know, I wasn't on the first descent of the Sturges, but the cool thing about the Sturges is when you go in there, Brad, you're gonna feel like you're on a first descent.
I believe that. When I like that.
even though, you know, Aniol and Benny and the teams, they've just like, they're playing at such a different level, going back to back, going day in, day out, doing it over and over again, just normalizing it, you know? It doesn't mean that for you, it's going to be, and I'm going to just keep putting you on the spot because I love it, you know, that it's not going to be that any, you know, any less rewarding, any less transformational. The same lessons are still available, if you will. And you know, in this piece of like where we came from, you know, Johnny and Chuck and I, and then all of a sudden we ran into Scott and the team in California, and we actually missed in California. We met in Washington on the Little White, or on the Clackamas originally, but on the Little White, you know, of all places. What a great place to meet, you know, back when Spirit Falls had been run just a handful of times at that point, you know. It was like, but now it's fun because I get to, you know, Scotty and I are the same age ostensibly. I'm a couple months back, but like, we've been on this journey together long enough now that we get to look back and see how we've changed. And like you said, Scott, you know, you're a different person. You're 2.0. We all, you know, it's like Scotty 2.0, what, you know, and it wasn't just, I don't feel like for you, Scott, it was just what was in your head. You know, it was so much more, and it's this culmination of experiences. And I think that, you know, that's what makes a person, that's what makes people, right? Concept, skills, experience. Experience is like this big one. And I just love that we have a story together, that Scotty and I have a story. I love that it's shareable. You know, again, there's so many pieces that will never make it into a film, you know, that won't go into a book because they're probably, you know, they might have gotten not remembered or this or that, but it's still part of the story. And, you know, I just think that, you know, again, there's so many of these opportunities in life to just like put yourself in a really interesting place, and you're going to learn about yourself. You're going to learn a lot about the people around you, and it makes it a lot more meaningful if you actually talk about it afterwards. And I think that's one of the things that I take away from the film, you know, is just like over time, I think we all learned how to talk about things. You know, we learned how to like be present with one another, not just like, come on, don't fuck this up. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here, but like,
I think it's fine. We're just
we gotta make it to the takeout, right? Like, don't screw up. We gotta make it to the takeout. And so, you know, I don't know, it's interesting. But yeah, I just love having that story. And you know, FD, I got rolled up in FD in the story. Brad, you and I you know, we're rolled up in the story, and you know, the story is so much bigger than all of us. And now it gets to be, you know, fodder for many others. So
that's something that's come up a lot, you know, and in that a lot of people, especially in the kayaking community, are like have reached out and it's like, man, I wish there was more kayaking, or that was like a kayaking film. And my response to them is like, especially a couple people that were really close to me that came back with some critique on the film, and I had to remind them, I'm like, it's not a kayaking film. and they're like, huh. And so that was and it isn't. I think kayaking's the vehicle, right? And the journey, which I feel like couldn't be scripted. You know, I so many things had to go a certain direction for me to get, and I'm so grateful and so lucky. I don't feel like I feel like I'm so lucky because I know that it can be so different, and it could have gone so many different ways. You know, somebody asked in one of the questions here, you know, what was my relationship with like fear and death? And, you know, how do I deal with fear and death and cancer? And my response to that was that the fear is overcome by making things second nature, and spending the time and getting back in that space to where I made it comfortable. When you make something super comfortable, fear goes by the wayside. And death has always been an interesting one for me personally. You know, I've always said dying's dead easy, it's living that's hard. And with my particular case and my particular tumor, my tumor typically doesn't kill. What happens with my tumor is people, they end up losing their eyesight, or they end up with paralysis. And those are my greatest fears. I've lived like this incredible life. For me to kick over to the other side is a much easier thought than me sucking out of a straw or not being able to see. That's what terrifies me. And so I just, those are my greatest fears. And I was never worried about dying or going or passing away. I've always felt like that was like an expedition in itself, and it was something that I actually I'm at peace with, and don't really have um, any sort of like energy around. It's the other stuff that really um, affected me more, and that sits in the back of my mind more.
Scott, I remember we were at the takeout of a river in Patagonia and, a few years ago. You referenced this trip, but I think I asked you a similar question. Like you explained where you were at, and I wanted this. There'll be a couple follow-ups here, but in that you were, it was time to go home at some point for scans. Your last scans, shockingly, your tumor hadn't grown, which I think, not to put words in your mouth, but through the film and our conversation, I remember you attributed a lot of that to being on the water, to being focused on kayaking, to having that space outside. And I said, well, how are you dealing with the scan anxiety going back to this? And you just said, I'm just surrendering. And he kind of said it with this like sort of almost like this peace about you. And I wonder, is that how you felt? Is that how you feel? Is there any element of just surrendering to your circumstances and being focused on what you can control and living the life? Is that?
Well, I like I said in the film, I think one of the biggest realizations that I had, I had been this person that had tried to control all outcomes of my life, and I had tried to manipulate all outcomes in my life. And, no matter how hard I try, either in the holistic space or with Western medicine, it doesn't necessarily mean that my tumor's going to go away. And once I realized that, like, oh my God, I don't have control over what's in my head. I can try, but it doesn't mean the outcome and then, like, if your ego's involved there, right? Like, I'm going to control this tumor, and then like the tumor grows, then you're just like, fuck the tumor, or if you beat the tumor, then like, yeah, I won the tumor. And just think about that energy, right? It's just this up and down, high and low, instead of just like, wait, like, if I don't have control of anything, and then I stop controlling everything, and then I just surrender to everything, and then I just show up, like, it's such a better way to move through life in general. And then I just started to like apply it to so many other things in my life, and it just changed my perspective. And I don't want this to be misconstrued, because I think some people could take it the wrong way, but like, my tumor has been a gift for me in a lot of ways, so many ways. And 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 I'm grateful for the journey that I've been on. I'm so grateful for the journey that I've been on, and the path that has been laid out before me, and the awareness that I've been able to come to, because it's brought so much peace to my heart. I don't hang on to things like death anymore. I don't hang on to things with paralysis or losing eyesight. I don't stay up at night grinding out on that stuff as much as I used to. And when you're in full swing, it's really hard not to get caught up in the day to day, and taking your ego out of that, and just, doing everything in your power to show up and do the best that you can possibly do, but then being okay with it not working out the way that you'd hoped it had worked out. And it took a lot for me to get there, and to surrender to that, and not try to control it. And yeah, I just, it has been probably the single biggest sort of realization that I've had in this entire journey is just that.
It's cool, man. It's a lesson that you gave me, one of many, and certainly one that I think about often in a lot of different capacities. So I appreciate you being the guide and teacher for many of us. I want to just rapid fire. I know we're getting kind of tight on time. I have a couple more questions here. Mostly first of all, some great questions coming in. Adam, stoked to see an FD adventure soon, man. And yeah, I've definitely got to raise awareness about within the getting more men to FD. I think, as Scott touched on earlier, I think there's so much power, and I've seen it firsthand. And I think we can make some strides there. Scott, this question here toward the end of the movie, towards the end of the movie, there was mention of a study measuring the impact of outdoor experiences in health. Be interested to hear more about that part of the story. Is that something you could touch on quickly?
Yeah. So in the last couple of years, I was, one of the biggest things that I attribute to the tumor growth to that year, or that, I would say, year and a half, almost 2 years. I think I paddled something like just under 300 days in that span. And just as I was sort of getting going, as it alludes to in the film, I had shown enough growth to basically start looking at doing radiation. And that's kind of when I had told my neurosurgeon, Dr. Gian, at that point. I was like, look, I've got this thing. I really want to go do it. I'm not going to deal with this thing until I, get done with this. And, he was not happy about it. He definitely expressed concern about the behavior. And I was just like, look, I would much rather, risk the tumor growth than and not get a chance at going and doing this. And so when I went through that and I came home, and at the end of the film, I did go in, and I had almost no tumor growth in that year and a half period of time. Well, since then, and since COVID, really, I just prior to COVID, I had started an N of 1 where I was basically doing all these different alternative modalities. I was, I could go on and on about it, but basically I was trying everything under the sun to try to, reduce or to try to make it go away, with diet, with supplements, with exercise, all of these sorts of things. And then COVID kind of went down, and I had gotten an MRI, and I had shown a little more tumor growth. And then about a year and several months went by, and this is about a month ago. We were premiering at Telluride Mountain Film Festival, and I had a neurosurgeon from Santa Monica come up to me after the film, and he's like, "Hey, I used to run UCLA neuro department, and my name's Dr. Dan Kelly. You should come down. Let's do a picture, and let's take a look and see where you're at." And so I did that, and I definitely have not been in the outdoors as much as I have been in the last 5 years. It's the least amount that I've been in the last 5 years, just because of COVID. There's been no traveling, so that's been really tricky. There's been no water in California, so there just hasn't been the kayaking that I'm used to kayaking. And but I had been trying all of these other different modalities, and I've had the most tumor growth in the last year and a half than I have in the last 7 years. And so I'm looking at another surgery right now within the next year to have it. It was under 0.5 centimeters. And then, I was in between 0.5 and 0.75, which is totally fine. That's essentially stabilized. And then in the last year and a half, it grew 2 centimeters. So 2.5. And so that's operable at that point. And so I went down and, I called my neurosurgeon that did the first procedure. He got the MRI, and then I went down to Santa Monica. I did the second. I went down for a second opinion. Both of them, obviously, as a neurosurgeon, they come back and, they cut for a living. But I had become really close friends with my neurosurgeon, Dr. Gian, who's in the film. And, he's given me a really candid, point of view, and he doesn't like to operate, and he treats me like family. So I'm super grateful for that. And same with Dr. Dan Kelly. He was amazing. He, was like, look, I think, you should probably operate. And then the other option, obviously, is to do radiation. Dr. Kelly was like, look, you're 50 years old. If you start radiating right now, it's just not, it's not the way forward. I'd rather see you do another surgery or two. And the benefit to it, though, is that typically, especially my tumor is a little bit different in that it's a pituitary adenoma, which a lot of people are like, oh, it's benign tumor, and that it's not that. Mine actually has malignant cells. It's really rare. Fortunately, it's still growing, or fortunately, it's a slow grower. So, but typically when somebody has it reduced, it within 2 or 3 years, you're having to look at doing something to it again. You're either having to, cyberknife, you're looking to have it do radiation. And that wasn't something that I was super excited about. And I will say that, being outside and all the diet stuff and all the supplements and all of the sort of alternative therapies that I went through, February 3rd, 2022 will be 7 years. So 7 years without having to deal with it. And if I do, I'm going to finish the book with Thayer here probably in the spring, and then sometime in the fall of 2022, if the things that I'm doing now, it doesn't reduce, then I'll probably go back in for another surgery at that point, and have it taken out again. And it was a pretty interesting conversation with my neurosurgeon too, in that, he's like, look, I was like, hey, initially Dr. Kelly was like, I think I can get that whole thing out, because it's basically embedded in and around my right carotid artery. So they don't like to mess with your carotid artery, obviously, because of the importance of, the blood flow into your brain. It's super important, right? And so it's the risk to reward ratio. And I had this really interesting conversation with Dr. Gian the other day. He's like, look, the risk to reward he's like, look, I can go in there and gamble and get that thing out of there, but the risk to reward is not worth it. I would rather just go in and pull it back to where it was, and just, hopefully every 7 to 8 years you come in and do another brain surgery. And I was like, you're just like, it's the gift that keeps on giving, it's like this thing that just won't go away. And after the first surgery, I'd had this like immense amount of hope that like something was going to come along that I could have done to reduce it and make it go away. And I've fought hard, but I haven't lost sleep in that, in fighting hard. And yes, it's hard to hear that diagnosis that it's growing again and that you're facing another surgery. I was heartbroken, a little bit, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but what am I going to do? Give up, or am I going to just, no, I'm just going to surrender and let the universe take control of this thing. And hopefully it's going to point me in the right direction, and the wind will be at my back. And that's hopefully, yeah, what happens.
Well, I appreciate that, man. You got a big community surrounding you. I'm looking at everyone. Yeah, you got a lot of support here, which is awesome to see. So, I'm so humbled. I'm so honored that I even took part in this conversation. I want to end it kind of with one quick question. What's next? And I want to hear from all three of you. Willie, I know we're going to run this to Keen. Apparently, looks like Kyle Marinello said he's in. He'll be swimming alongside me. So, but as quickly as you can, what do you got? What's on the horizon? What are you waking up to right now? Willie, we'll start with you.
I'll go ahead. I mean, I'm just really excited. Again, life is a journey, and we come from one place and we end up at different places along the journey. And First Ascents is where my heart's at right now, and it's where it's been for the last decade, and it's still there. And this is just such a great opportunity. And I think it's been pointed out here, we have a deficit at First Ascents. We don't attract this whole other demographic, which is guys, to come out to programs which will be meaningful for them as well. And I'm excited to start, keep on kind of pushing this tidal wave forward, because I think, as so many have identified, there's a great opportunity here. Scott, thank you for sharing. Rush, thanks for giving Scott a platform to share. It's really important. And so I'm just going to take this momentum and roll it back into this, whenever this pandemic thing figures itself out and we can hit the ground running full speed ahead. That's where this is headed. So that's
great.
take away.
Rush, what you got? This was a big project for you, and I know it's still in project mode. You know, you're still riding this wave, but what's next for you?
Yeah, I still kind of, doing some tidying up with the River Runner stuff, but I'm working on a few kind of different projects. Like the sort of the big project is trying to tell the life story of Henry Coetzee, who was killed by a crocodile back in 2010. So I'm working on trying to get that kind of turned into like a big narrative feature. And then in addition, trying to do some different types of work, like, one of which is working with indigenous communities, specifically down in the sort of Klamath River area where I grew up, trying to get them out on the water. So just kind of working on a little project there. And then the immediate thing I'm working on right now is actually just trying to finish up an album, another, kind of hip hop project. So that's kind of like at the moment, the next thing on the list. But yeah, I do also just want to say thank you to you and First Ascents and really for, and to Scott, obviously, for trusting me to tell this story. And, I've learned a lot also through this process. And I want to also say thank you for, giving me some tools that I think that I also kind of needed in my life, and I think, Scott's willingness to be vulnerable and to talk about going to therapy, for example, is something that has, also inspired me to do that as well. And I have like no shame in saying it. And I hope that message really resonates with more people in the way that, it definitely resonated with me and has, given me some tools to kind of be a little bit more open. And I think in the kayaking community, sometimes we tend to be sort of, closed off with feelings and whether that's, surrounding death or, for many folks, cancer or whatever it might be, being more open, putting that stuff out there. That's really what I think that I've gotten the most of out of this project. So that's thanks, honestly, in large part to the FD community. So thanks for that.
Hell yeah, buddy. I like to hear it, man. Scott, what you got next?
Man,
big one.
I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but Thayer Walker and I are working on a book. We're about 60,000 words in on a 120,000 word project. So that's sort of the most important thing right now on my hit list. I really want to just get that thing, and I'm super excited because the Stikine and the Zambezi and the inner workings of the Sang Po and if the movie is kind of like the cliff notes to the book, and Thayer's such an incredible writer, and he's just gone off the deep end with this thing, and so I'm super grateful for him and everything that he's doing. We're getting ready to leave for Costa Rica. Costa Rica was one of the first places as a kid that I went kayaking, and I had a lot of growth there. And so we're headed there on October 9th to go and paddle down there for 10 days. And so, yeah, that's like the most immediate thing. And then my girlfriend and I have this retreat sort of campground, and we run that together. It's called the Consumnes River Ranch. And, people come out and stay with us, and it's just this unbelievable place on the river that we're sharing with the world. So if you find yourself in California and you need a place to stay, you should look us up. It's amazing. As well as Rush and you and Willie. I'm so thankful for all three of you guys. Without your guys' support and without Rush, the kid's heart and soul is into this project, and it went way above and beyond. And there was never one of the things when you do something like this, right, is you got to have trust. And I don't see myself or could have seen myself doing this with anybody else. Like I wholeheartedly knew in my heart and my soul that Rush was the person to do this film, and just watching him go through the process of 3.5 years and the deep dive that he took and all the different angles and navigating everything that he went through and being by his side through it all too. Just so grateful for him and everything that he he brought to this, and obviously Willie. I mean, guy's my best friend. I've known him forever, and the First Descents community, and Brad, so grateful for you. But I mean, it was really at First Descents that, really gave me a huge amount of courage, and I'm so grateful. And even the one trip that I did, I'm still in touch with so many folks from that one trip. We've lost a few people from that trip, which as that can happen. But I'm so grateful for everything that you've created, and just all the things, as kids growing up and spending time in Africa on the Nile, and just our journey. And man, just it's surreal. It's really unbelievable to be in the place that we're in right now. And all I can hope for is that we all get on the river sometime soon together.
Nothing would make me happier, man. I'm sure we can make that happen too. Maybe we won't start with the Stakeem, but we'll
we should go back down to South America, man. They're opening it back up, I hear.
Dude, I would love that. You don't get asked me twice. I'm in. Actually,
we're really nice
about that. I'm so down. So we're gonna just, for everyone. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in for this. That tuned in. You guys are you are the FD community. You're the beating heart of this organization, this mission. You make it all possible. Thanks for showing up, for listening, for supporting. Some great comments and questions. We're going to do a follow-up blog post to answer any unanswered questions. We'll send that out to our community. Likewise, Rush's music, Scott's book, Rush's future film, which I can't wait to see. All that stuff we will be blasting out to the FD community through newsletters and everything else. So just keep your eyes out for that. Rush, oh yeah, if you guys, if you can review the film on IMDb, that'd be sweet. That will really just position this film in a stronger place and get more people to see it, bring more awareness to Scott and his story in kayaking, and certainly First Descents. So I really appreciate that. And Rush, it's going to be available for purchase soon, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk about that quickly?
Yeah. I'll just add that it will be on Amazon and iTunes, and up on all the various platforms probably in the next month. So yeah, if you see it on any platform, if you can give it 5 stars, that's super helpful and gets it more visibility. So that's really helpful if folks can do that.
And I'm sure Turtle, who's kindly helped us technologically challenge people get this call on the internet, make it possible. She will be blasting that out to you all. So just stay tuned, read those newsletters. And as always, if you guys know someone who could benefit from First Descents experiences, in the healthcare professional world, MS, young adult cancer, send them over. We're getting ready to launch our 2022 programs. And now that hopefully we're getting past this, Willie, Sweet D mentioned, kind of getting into calmer waters with this pandemic, we really want to really ramp up our programming again and get back to what we do best. And that's provide the healing power of adventure to people. So spread the word. Thank you three again. Such an awesome conversation. So much love and respect for you guys. And as Willie said, I hope to see you on the river before too long. So.
Ooh. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, FD.
Thank you.
Thanks, Turtle.
Turtle.